Joining us from Sydney is Antony Loewenstein. He's an independent journalist and the author of the Palestine Laboratory. He was based in the occupied East Jerusalem area between 2016 and 2020. Antony, always good to have you on this news hour. I'd like to just pick up quickly on what Mohammed was saying there about the increased Israeli settler raids and this talk of the annexation of the occupied West Bank. It's something we heard Donald Trump recently say to reporters, don't worry, it's not going to happen. But then we get a statement from Netanyahu on Sunday saying that Israel is a sovereign country. They decide their own security policies. How true is that, though, given that relationship with the United States?
I mean, the West Bank has been annexed unofficially for years. I mean, in some ways, the official annexation, if it ever happens, is not hugely important. Obviously, it's significant in terms of how Israel and the West would potentially see the endless occupation of Palestinian territory. But as you say, the practical reality on the ground, which has been for years, but hugely accelerated in the last 2 years since October 7, has been on one hand a Gazification, a massive amounts of ethnic cleansing. Tens of thousands of Palestinians have been forcibly removed from their lands. Settlers working with Jewish militias and the IDF. There essentially is no protection for Palestinians who live there. And in fact, the aim really of this policy is not dissimilar to the Israeli policy in Gaza, which is the ultimate goal is to have no Palestinians there, or as few as possible, which has really been the goal for decades. And if you can't remove all Palestinians in one go, you do it incrementally, step by step by step, making life so intolerable. And that's essentially what's been happening in the West Bank. And I fear that there's kind of this illusion when Donald Trump says, oh, trust me, I promise the Arab countries annexation won't happen, when the facts on the ground speak to a different reality. Annexation is happening in real time.
Absolutely. And the reality on the ground for people in Gaza is, as you say, there is very little to no protection. There is talk now of this international security force, but we heard Netanyahu say that it will be Israel who decides who can form part of that force. They obviously don't want some countries to be part of that. And then it just begs the question, how safe actually then will Palestinians in Gaza be?
I mean, the fear that many people have, including Palestinian friends of mine, is that Gaza will essentially be split in two, that you have more than 50% of Gaza, which is currently controlled by Israel, and you have a situation in the areas which is controlled still by Hamas, essentially, where Israel is now backing at least 4 militias. So I think people in the West often don't understand this. Israel is backing, arming, training and funding anti-Hamas militias in an attempt to overthrow Hamas in the areas that they control. And when Jared Kushner, the frankly deeply compromised American official that's working with Trump on this so-called peace deal in Gaza, is talking about a long-term future, it's important to say that when he discusses reconstruction in Gaza, he's talking about the areas that are controlled by Israel. Now, for the last really close to 20 years after Hamas took control in Gaza after the election there 20 or so years ago, there was a siege, there was a blockade. People in Gaza didn't have freedom of movement in and out. I see no indication of a future plan moving forward of that radically changing. In the Israeli press, which often doesn't get attention outside, there are maps that are being shown of the Israeli government's vision, and frankly, many in Israel and Jewish population supports this, of essentially an endless occupation, a belief that there is a Jewish right, an Israeli right to control the territory, clearly in the West Bank, but also in Gaza. So if there is a belief among some in the Arab elites that Trump can be trusted or Israel can be trusted, the so-called vision here is something, so we're told by Jared Kushner, is like Dubai. Now, Dubai and the UAE, to be clear, are cities built by slaves, mostly from Southeast Asia, and developed by slaves and maintained by slaves. When I mean slaves, I mean slave labor. This continues to this day in much of the Gulf states, Dubai, Abu Dhabi, etc. This is the so-called American and Arab vision, Gulf vision for Gaza, which is frankly something I would argue the majority of Palestinians would refuse.
If you talk about that vision and that being the broader vision, could that vision possibly change or be blinded in any way if the Netanyahu government was replaced with another Israeli leader or across the political spectrum in Israel? Is that the vision?
Look, it's possible Netanyahu is going to face an election next year. And according to current polls, his popularity has gone up again, but he may lose. But the likely alternatives, as I've been saying for years, is very similar. The vision for a Palestinian entity, Palestinian space, Palestinians amongst pretty much the entire mainstream Israeli political elite, from the so-called mainstream left to the far right, is remarkably similar. No one believes in Palestinian self-determination, nobody. And frankly, neither does the Trump administration, which is populated by far-right extremists and Christian fanatics. I mean, this is the vision. So if you say, is it possible for something different? It is, but without outside pressure to make it different, it will not be. And I think many people, including many Palestinian friends of mine in the West Bank and Gaza, have no desire to live in yet more years of occupation, managed somehow by an international Arab-led force, which are only going to be enforcing the occupation as what the Palestinian Authority has been doing for 30, 40 years.
Antony Loewenstein, always good to get your analysis. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.